Let's jump into it. We only have about 20 minutes. That's okay. We can do this. So, I want to welcome everybody and those online back to Christian Heritage course. We just have about 20 minutes, but I'm going to fill up in between our church services each week, step by step through the tour that we're going to tell you, and going to be a blessing to you. For those who are going, you'll be able to have some background material. For those who are not going, you're going to feel like you walked through it this morning. So, we're right up to the Pilgrims. If you weren't here and you didn't have any of the background, watch the previous 2 classes about it. But we're all the way up to the Pilgrims. Let me ask you, while I'm prepping for this, the Pilgrims came from the Puritans or the Separatists? What were they? Separatists, that's right. Separatists were basically Puritans without any hope of reforming the Anglican Church. And so they separated from them, and they got a new start in the New World, and that New World was with the Pilgrims themselves. So what I want to do is, the Pilgrims came over in what year? Just going to give you a little quiz. 1620. How long did they travel on the ship? 66 days. What was the average speed of that? 2 miles an hour for 66 days. Rarely came up on deck. Of the 3 decks of the Mayflower, which one did they stay on? Middle one. How tall was that middle deck? 5.5 feet. Bob Phillips was not fitting. Even Dave LeGros, it was just not a good day. That's when we were glad to be shorter, and that. Fred would have never made it, hunching over the whole time. So, good morning, Calvin. So, let me get right up to because I want to finish with the Pilgrims. So, here's what I want to give you. I want to give you what their church services were like from documentation. And then I want to take you to the Monument to the Fathers and to the Plymouth Plantation. And so those 3 things in 20 minutes. We can do this. So I want to read to you something. And this comes straight from a couple of big documentation works that have some original documentation in them. I want to read straight from them to tell you about their church services. First of all, let's remember what they were rebelling against. The Anglican Church. The Anglican Church looked a lot like what church? That's right. It was Episcopalian. Episcopalian is Anglican and American. But it looked a lot like the Catholic Church. And so what the Puritans and the Separatists, the Puritans were trying to reform the Anglican Church. The Separatists just looked at this and said, this is all a bunch of hocus pocus. We got to get back to the original first century church. We need to do things more simple. So keep that in mind as I read this. So, Puritans rejected Christmas and Easter and various saints' day because they had no scriptural justification. Now, as soon as you hear that, you go, what? Remember this. If it wasn't in the Bible, they didn't want to have anything to do with it if it wasn't listed there. And remember, they're rebelling against a tradition. So it's not that all those traditions are bad, but they are to them. So, let's see, because they had no scriptural justification. And in their worship services, get this, they rejected hymns. They did. They rejected hymns because to them, that was just part of the Anglican Church. The recitations of the Lord's Prayer and the creeds, all done away with. And the reason is they wanted to be more fresh alive. Did you read that? Were the early church doing it? So they were they went from this high church to very low church. The Separatists believed that the worship of God must progress from the individual directly to God. And that set forms like the Church of England, the Book of Common Prayer, interfered with that progression by directing one's thoughts to the book and inward to oneself. The only exceptions were the Psalms and the Lord's Supper, communion, both of which had scriptural basis, so they kept them. Their pastor was Pastor Robinson, expressed it in a couple different ways. But he said, the Sabbath services were held twice on Sunday. Okay, so picture this. In addition to sermons were often given on Thursdays, as occasion demanded, days of thanksgiving or days of fasted and humiliation were proclaimed. These latter were movable weekday holidays called in response to God's providence. Both were observed in a manner similar to the weekly Sabbath, the church service, with morning and afternoon services. The approximate times of church were 9 a.m. to noon. And you're complaining? Go over an hour nowadays. They're hanging out for 3 hours in the service. And so that's when you're in church. You're in from 9 a.m. to noon, and the pilgrims in the afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. Wow. Thank you, Debbie. Wow. So picture that. 9 to noon, you go to lunch, then you're back from 2 to 5. That's what every Sunday looked like. I'm talking about, for those who just came in, what the pilgrims' church services look like. Once they reached the meeting house where they met, the men and the boys 16 and older sat on one side. The women and children sat on the other side. John Withrop, can you picture that? Okay, should we start doing that? All the guys on one side, all the ladies and the kids on the other. John Withrop, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony that we'll get to later, attended morning and afternoon Sabbath meetings while on the brief visit to Plymouth in October 1632. At the time, he pays special attention in his words to prophesying. While no examples of prophecy have been come down to us, it seems to have been similar in nature to a mini sermon consisting of, thank you very much, you're a very kind soul. I was just given my breakfast. So they would prophesy. There's no examples of this, but it's explained that on the Lord's Day, this is one of them in the literal first-hand account. On the Lord's Day, there was a sacrament which they did partake in, communion. And in the afternoon, Mr. Roger Williams, according to their custom, propounded a question to which the pastor, Mr. Smith, spake briefly. Then Mr. William prophesied. And after that, the governor of Plymouth spoke to the questions. And after him, an elder, then some 2 or 3 more of the congregation. Then the elder desired the governor of Massachusetts and Mr. Wilson to speak to it, which they did. When this was ended, the deacon, Mr. Fuller, put the congregation in mind of their duty of contribution, the offering, whereupon the governor and all the rest went down to the deacon's seat and put it into the box, and then they returned. Bottom line to it was this. They would have a sermon. They would have some songs. They would very, very much like what you're feeling nowadays. And then somebody would prophesy. Prophesy is basically a proclamation on God's behalf. And we don't have any examples of it, but somebody said basically, thus saith the Lord. And then a lot of people talked about whether or not they believed it or not. Right? Ruling elders, just want to read straight from this, were responsible for the government of the congregation. But as they were laymen and not ordained ministers, they could not deliver the sacraments. They couldn't deliver communion. So whereas our elders and deacons do that here, they couldn't. You had to be an ordained minister at the time. One of them, Governor William Bradford, supplies additional details on the aspects of worship in Plymouth. And here's what he wrote, quote, "In teaching, he was very moving and stirring of affections, also very plain and distinct in what he taught," talking about the pastor, "by which means he became the more profitable to the hearers. He had a singular good gift in prayer, but public and private, in ripping up the heart and conscience before God in the humble confession of sin, and begging the mercies of God for the pardon of the same. He always thought it better for ministers to pray more often and divided their prayers than let them being long and tedious." How weird, a prayer being long and tedious. Hold on, a couple last things. Prayer was very completely extemporaneous. It was just very impromptu. To have a written prayer was something Anglicans did, and they didn't do that. Still today, if I go in the Presbyterian church, when I was first a minister in that 25 years ago down in Southern California, there a lot of times there were written prayers. And, I've responded up to that. I'm like, I'm just fine talking on my own to God. But they're like, well, no, this is what we do there. And I actually got used to it, and there were some really good prayers. And then where I didn't like them, I'd mix them up and change them a little bit. One last thing. Finally, Psalms were the only music allowed in the service, which is what the Psalms were. Psalms were a book of songs in the beginning. So picture this. Nowadays, people love when you leave a church hymn in. I mean, the church hymns are the best songs in the world, right? Not to them. They wouldn't do those. So back in their day, it was the Psalms. Why? Why the Psalms? Why only the Psalms? Why do you think? It was in the Bible. And if it's not in the Bible, it can't be good. So isn't that amazing? Hymns were rejected because they had no scriptural basis. Just letting you know. Isn't that fascinating how that worked? So I want to take you to two places. We won't do the monumental, Stephen. By the way, good morning, Stephen. Thanks for being in the pulpit, in the cockpit. So I want you to see, we won't do monumental one, but do the other one. I want you to see this is two places we're going to visit there. And one is a monument to the fathers. This was put up so that people would never forget the Christian history and belief of the Pilgrims. Nowadays, try to get it taught on in any type of college or university setting. They have to admit it because these people were so spirit-filled, loved Jesus people. That's why they were there. That's why they left their home to come over and establish a church that was free for them to be. So this monument was put up to testify to them. This is one of the sites we'll see where you're going to meet a guy, a historian by the name of Leo Martin here. But I just want you to see a few minutes of basically what's inscribed on this monument. It's pretty powerful. Go ahead. Thank you, Stephen.
The National Monument to the Forefathers, the largest granite monument in the United States, was dedicated in 1889 to honor the English settlers who landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The monument's dedication reads, "Erected by a grateful people in remembrance of their labors, sacrifices, and sufferings for the cause of civil and religious liberty." The monument, 181 feet tall, features several figures depicting virtues the Pilgrims brought to America in 1620. The largest figure, Faith, is 36 feet tall and weighs 180 tons. The monument also features depictions of morality, law, education, and liberty.
Because they hardly go into it at all. A lot of times that's what you will hear about this monument. And yet when you're up there and you actually see it, you'll see one of the statues holding the Bible, holding the Scripture, holding the Ten Commandments, with the very constitution of the early Plymouth colony being the Bible. And the history of that as you're going around is absolutely staggering. You'll listen to this historian. By the time you're done, you will wonder how colleges and universities could even talk about the Pilgrims without their Christian background. You just can't. You can't, but they're doing it all the time now, friends. They're completely omitting, even with the Pilgrims, any type of religious background at all. Does anybody remember, who's the guy on the second tape? Stephen, what was his name? He was big on house renovations. What's his name? Yeah, everybody remember Bob Villa? Yeah, I mean, is he alive still? He's alive, right? So I haven't seen him. Well, in 1949, they put up a living museum to him. I have another clip. If I have time, I'll show it from Monumental, but I may save it for the tour. So there's more to see, but you'll see this statue, by the way, which was supposed to be twice its size in the very beginning. But they put up a living museum, which was the Plymouth Plantation. And what it was is a 16th century English colony. It's a little match. So when you go there, there are people completely devoted and in costume in their 16th century English little settlement. It's so great going in there because you can converse with them and they will not get out of character. I love it because I will talk about their Christian faith and even antagonize them a little bit. And they don't like it because they get really, really huff and puff inside. At one time I said, "So you guys are Christians?" And one lady goes, "Of course we are. Everyone is." And I'm like, "Is that right? Can you tell me about your faith?" She's all, "What do you want to know?" And I mean, unlike some historical parks I've been to that have covered it up, and these people are just flooding out. Now, I can still imagine, though, the younger that a kid goes in there, not knowing the history, for them to get to that place where they're talking about Christianity all the time, not easy. So who I'm going after this next time, I'm going to go after the young ones to see if they're really trained. It's part of our duty. Listen, part of our duty going around to these different historic places is to check and see if they are teaching the history, the American Christian heritage. All right, one other place. So I want to give you from Bob Villa. This is 5 minutes. We can make it. The 5 minutes, a little sample of the Plymouth Plantation. And by the way, it is spelled right with an I. So, right when it's done. Okay, so watch this, and people online after this, we're going to pick up next week, and I'm actually going to start to take you into Boston. I think I may show that monumental clip because it really goes into the detail of the Statue of the Forefathers, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm in no rush to get through all of this stuff, and really, I want to park on all of it for like weeks. But I've got to get up to Boston, then I've got to go down to Philadelphia, got to go to Gettysburg and Valley Forge. There's so much to see on the way down there. So, yeah, let's go right into it after that. So, thank you all. Watch this.
The Plymouth Plantation began nearly 50 years ago as the dream child of an amateur archaeologist named Henry Hornblower. He was fascinated by the story of the Pilgrims. He collected artifacts, and in fact, he wanted to start a museum. His family backed him in tearing down one of the family houses here on this property, which topographically is very, very similar to actual Plymouth. And so what he's done here is to create Leyden Street, the oldest street in America, and the original stockade. We're going to meet with Joel Ponce right now, who's one of the artisans here. He's going to help us go from the 20th century back to the 17th. Come on. Hi, Joel.
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning.
Welcome to Plymouth Plantation.
Thank you. Now, you're the constructionist, right? Which means that you're the builder, the carpenter, the joiner, the carver, all those things?
Well, I am, but we have a lot of talented people on staff that do those things right down to the site. What we have tried to reproduce is the 1627 village. We have several houses I want you to go to, and several construction stops, as it were, to see.
Great.
Let's stop first over at the Jenny house.
Fabulous. Good morrow, Mistress Jenny.
Good day to you.
How are you?
I am well, and yourself?
Just fine, thank you. I see you're busy cooking.
Indeed, it is some turnip from my garden that I will boil into a salad for our dinner.
You boil your salad?
Oh, I indeed.
Oh, I eat mine raw.
I am surprised you are in such good health then, and much the better boiled, methinks.
Is that right? You have a lovely home.
Oh, you are most kind. Would you favour to look about?
Thank you, yeah. No, it's lovely furniture and everything. Now, how do they build houses like this?
Well, these are just simple timber frames that are set right down into the ground. There's no foundation. We have a couple of houses right now that are under construction. Would you like to see them?
Sure, that's what we're here for.
Let's go.
Thank you. Good day.
God keep you, sir.
For those who just came in, this is the Plymouth Plantation, one of the places we're going to hit on a tour in June. Just giving them a little taste of it.
How are you?
I am well.
Now, what are you doing up there?
Oh, just putting a bit of repairs on the ridge.
On the ridge.
Aye.
So this is what you call thatching. How do you do this thatching?
The bottom, she starts at the bottom of she, and she's sewn on, adding course atop course and she, with ledgers, and at the very top of she, come you and put a ridge on her.
Ah, I didn't get that, not a clue. But as long as it doesn't leak.
Aye.
Nice job. We'll let you get back to work.
Good day to you, sir.
That'd be a fun job. A living museum of the Pilgrims. Has anybody been there to the Plymouth Plantation?
I didn't
Anybody?
realize they would have had
No?
clapboards like this.
Yeah, those are split oak clapboards.
Split like firewood.
Yeah, they called it riven.
Aha. Good morrow.
Good morrow.
How do you build your house?
Well, the inner wall is of wattle and daub. The wattle is your lath, stretched here to hold your daub. Daub is sort of a poor man's plaster.
Aha.
This poor man's for it wants lime.
It wants lime, does it?
Thus the house must be covered on the outside with these clapboards to
Sure.
protect from the rain.
If there's no lime, then it would just wash away in the
It
winter.
would just wash right away.
And that's how he makes his wattle. Great. What's the next stop?
Well, let's go down the street and I'll show you some pit signs.
Well, Joe, when the Pilgrims landed here, they found a lot of virgin forest, right?
Exactly. They found a lot of oak and pine forests that had been untouched.
So that's what they used right away
These are pine planks.
for building. Good morrow.
Good morrow, good
How,
morning, sir.
how does your job go?
It goes very well, thank you.
Ah, tell me about what you're doing here.
Well, as you can see, we've got this pine log light over the pit, and lines have been struck down the length of it.
Yes.
And one man need to stand below in the pit,
He
another
doth.
on top of the timber. And by slitting down, following the lines, so planks are made.
And so it's a heavy saw that you're using,
Oh, it is indeed.
and you push it against each other?
No. You always pull on a two-man saw.
pull.
If you push upon it, then you'll bind her up.
Aha. You don't want to bind her up. Now, where will these planks be used?
They're going to be loft boards for Goodman Brown, his house.
So Goodman Brown, is that where we just were?
That's the house that we just left.
Indeed. What a nice job. Well, we won't keep you from your work. Glad we've got power saws now, I guess. Well, it's a fabulous place. And I know you get, what, about 500,000 visitors a year?
We get about 500,000 a year. It's a lot of people to come through here.
Joel, thank you for the tour.
Thank you for coming.